my name is Anushan and welcome to the very first episode of the Public Finance Decoded. This is a new series that is done by PublicFinance.lk, in which we will try to understand and explain the difficult public finance and economic concepts. In today's video, we will be looking at a very serious and important public finance topic of the country, which is the debt problem. So in this video, we will firstly look at how we can measure the debt burden of a country, and secondly, try to find out the factors which affect the increase or decrease in the debt levels. And thirdly, we'll try to find out why this is a problem now as opposed to past. Currently, the central government debt of the country is 15 trillion rupees at the end of the year 2020. 20 years ago, that is in the beginning of the year 2000, this number was only 1 trillion rupees. Ever since, the debt has grown 15 times. However, we cannot come to a conclusion that the debt burden has also increased 15 times because the country's income was also growing in that period. So when the income of the country has increased, the country is in a better position to pay back its debt. Therefore, we need to compare the debt relative to the size of the economy, that is the GDP. So how do we do this? Is by using an indicator called debt to GDP ratio. So how do we measure this ratio? It is very simple, just the debt divided by the GDP of the country. Now this ratio increases when the numerator, that is the debt increase, is more than the increase in the GDP. And this ratio reduces when it's the other way around, that is when the GDP increase is more than the debt increase. For example, let's look at the debt to GDP ratio in the past. In 1950s, this ratio was only around 20% of GDP. Ever since, it started to gradually increase until it reached 100% in 1989. Then it gradually fell and increased again back to more than 100% in 2001. However, since 2003, the debt to GDP has started declining until 2013. The main reason for this is that the GDP growth in these years was much larger than the growth in debt. And we can see since 2013, this ratio has again started to increase. The main reason for this is that the growth in the nominal GDP was lower than the growth in the debt levels. So it's simple, right? To maintain a low debt to GDP ratio, we just have to make sure that our GDP grows much more than the debt levels. Not really, because there are so many other factors that can influence these two variables. Now let's look at what are these other factors that can affect the debt and the GDP levels. Firstly, the factors that affect debt. They are primary deficit, interest payments, and currency depreciation. So primary balance is the difference between government's revenue and its expenditure, excluding interest payments. So the government will incur a primary deficit when its revenue is higher than its expenditure, excluding interest payments, and the government will incur a primary deficit when the revenue is much lower than the government's expenditure, excluding interest payments. Therefore, now the government will have to borrow more money in order to finance this. And that is why the debt increases when the government has a primary deficit. Now, if you look at the growth in the rupee value of debt in the last 5 years, we can see that primary deficit only contributed to this much increase in the debt. Also in 2017 and 18, there was a primary surplus, which meant that it negatively impacted the increase in debt. Even though the primary balance was zero or had been positive in certain years, we can see that the debt has still increased significantly in those years. This is because the government needs to pay interest on its previous year's accumulated debt. And we can see that interest payments actually take up the largest proportion of the increase in debt in the last 5 years. Around half of Sri Lanka's debt is currently denominated in foreign currency. That means when the government has to pay back its loan, it has to pay a higher rupee value compared to when it had borrowed the loan. This means when there is a currency depreciation, the value of the loan increases every year. We can see that in the past 5 years, currency depreciation has led to this much increase in the debt. And specifically, we can see in 2018 that a huge amount of debt has increased because of currency depreciation, more than 15%. Residual is all other factors other than these three which can affect the level of debt. For example, this could be something in which the government removes or transfers certain loans off its balance sheet.